Hello, welcome to Don't Be Afraid, your paranormal podcast. This is Atten, and I'm here with
Angela.
And tonight we have a very special guest.
Hi, I'm Xtina of Scarlet Foundry Tarot.
Hey, so thank you for joining us so much. For our listeners, you are specializing in, you're a tarot reader. Mm-hmm. And could you tell us about where that is?
Well, you can find me several days a week down in Pike Place Market in the store Tenzing Momo. I have a table there. That's where I'm reading out of primarily these days. But I also do phone readings and I do events. And you can get in touch with me through my website. It has all my contact information, which is scarletfoundry.com. Or if you just Google Xtina Seattle, that whole page is me. So.
Okay, and we'll have this information available with the podcast.
Okay.
Tenzing Momo. What do you have fond memories, Angela?
I love Tenzing Momo. I remember in my teens, which is 35 years or so ago now, but that was one of the rare few places back in those days you could go and find some of the special little formulas or get tarot readings. There was no place really like it back then. And they were actually very instrumental in me having street people stop chasing me and pounding on the windows of my cars, but that's a whole other story.
When helping you find out a protection
I went in one day,
situation?
exactly,
okay.
Literally asking, well, I have this weird scenario going on and it keeps happening, and do you have any suggestions?
I know it's sort of amazing because I can hear what people come in for, and it's anything and everything under the sun, right? And usually there's an answer.
Yeah. They gave me St. John's wort. Mm-hmm. And I, did a little ceremony. I put it on my heart. I did what I'll just call an invocation for protection. And I literally left my house. I said I wasn't going to get into the story. I'll give a very abbreviated version. But I left my house. The whole point and purpose was I used to have, some of the homeless people on the streets of Seattle literally chase me, throwing punches at my car, jumping on the back of my car as I drove away. I can't even tell you how many times that happened, so it was weird. But
people are complaining today.
Well, right. I mean, back then it was nothing like the homeless situation now.
Yeah.
I just was the magnet at the time. But I literally left my house that day after doing that invocation as I was told to do it, and used the oil the way that they told me to use it. And I also, telling of the time, went to the gas station at the foot of the hill and went inside to pay to put the gas in my car. And a guy asked me for spare change who was sitting, at the door. And I said, well, maybe when I come out, because back in those days you always had cash, right? Not cards. And he literally said to me on the way out when I gave him $1 or whatever, do you know why I spare changed you? And I said, no. And he went into this story about I'm Quicksilver Jack. And I'd never seen him there before. You knew the people, you'd see them over and over in your neighborhood. But I've never seen him before, and I've never seen him since. But it was one of those things where he had the shiniest blue eyes, and they were unusually clear. And he was telling me there's people out there that want to hurt you, and I'm going to do a prayer of protection for you. And I was wearing a little cameo that belonged to my great grandmother, and he said, oh, that's a family heirloom. You don't know how valuable it is. But I mean, just all of this stuff. And so literally it was the thing I was trying, to circumvent. It was another representative of a homeless man on the street who actually did the final reversal, and he was like an angel. I mean, so anyways, that's one of my good Tenzing Momo stories. I'm sure you have lots.
You were saying that you had been going there since you were a teenager.
Yeah, when I lived back in Detroit and Madison, I used to come out here in the summers and visit my dad, and whenever I come out here, I always went into Tenzing Momo, and it was so amazing to me because I was really a person who was always interested in the unseen world and the paranormal and the herbs and essential oils, and I just would spend hours in that store.
Yeah, what was going on? So speaking from my experiences, I know that when I was going to Tenzing Momo, it wasn't just because it was a cool shop with cool name and cool stuff in it. It's because there's stuff going on in my life that was needing to be taken care of. So what was your story? Was it just because you were interested, or was there something going on you were trying to...
Nothing in particular, just being able to touch base with something that I was sort of yearning for, which is, at the time, there wasn't a lot of that around where I was living back in the Midwest, and coming out to Seattle and Tenzing Momo was sort of the holy grail for me back then. Like, every year I'd go and I'd get a new t-shirt, and I'd wear the hell out of it. I'd cut it up, wear it, get a new one the next year, and just sensing that there was like another reality than the one I sort of grew up with back in the Midwest of, everybody going to work, doing their jobs, hanging out, coming home, and me being so interested in like this whole other realm that I knew existed, but I couldn't figure out how to find it. And Tenzing was sort of like a door to that for me. And so it's pretty amazing that I now work there, and I'm so thankful. It feels like home. And, I watch the city changing so much right now, and I'm like, I love the market more than ever, and I love that store more than ever. And it feels even more important now because it's still fine and good in 2019. Like, people go there all the time.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's totally stood the test of time, and it's still a standout place. And how cool that it was like a little beacon for you from so long ago, and really here you are now working there.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier you get to hear different people's stories about what they're coming in for the help they need. So you get to see a lot of people that are coming in for spiritual help, or...
Yeah, and it's a good resource for me because lots of times I like to give people homework, or they allow me to, through them, order books that I feel like are helpful. And so I can be with someone, whatever their issue is, like, hey, I have this. I can be like, you need protectionary, work. Let's use these candles, these stones. So I feel thankful that not only can I be like, hey, this is what you should do probably in this situation if you're interested, but here's all this resource around us right now. Yeah. It's great. It's really symbiotic.
So, and you are reading tarot cards there.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So, I consider myself a psychic energy reader, and I just use the cards after I start reading someone to give me more information, more details. Over the years, I've really developed just a symbiotic relationship with the cards. They're like a language to me. And what I find interesting is I didn't used to have to do this, but the way people think now, it seems to have changed, because I used to just read, but now everyone's like, well, did you read that card? Did you read that card? So now I have to let people know, like, hey, I'm super nonlinear, and I may not read a card because it's not talking to me. And they're like, but what does it mean? And I'm like, well, when we're done with the reading, I can tell you the traditional meaning of it. But for me, it's just gone to this other level of language, right? And it is amazing, like what you were saying. I'll read someone, I'll get an impression, and that comes from just being open. And then I'll take the cards, and it usually reinforces what I've already started saying. And it's amazing. And some of the more skeptical people in my life who love me are like, well, you're just a counselor. And I'm like, that's part of it, but there's really some spooky things that go on in a good way. The other day I had a situation where this person was alienated from someone, and all of a sudden I just thought, this person's in a cult. Sometimes I have to like sort of move like my mind around to get to the gist of what I'm trying to say. But the essence of it was this person's being influenced, and it's not by themselves. So it wasn't a cult, it was like a person, but the gist was there. Right. And so I sort of work with that a lot of times, where I'm getting impressions, I'm getting things, and the cards lots of times will help clarify that. But I trust them very much. And, it's very hard for me to read for myself. The reader needs a reader.
Yeah.
Because what I'm really doing is reading someone else. And what I'm trying to do is help people. So I actually do, especially if, when someone's just coming for 15 minutes, I actually do ask questions. And I get a couple different reactions from that because I don't want to mess around. I want to know, I'm going to go in, I'm going to get the information I'm getting, but what do you want me to focus on? But some people don't like that. Yeah, they think that you're not as legitimate if you're asking questions. So I have people that have a wall up and they'll be like, you tell me, right?
I think that's why I do my technique, is because I'm trying to prove to myself that it works still, But then it does, and it's, how is it working? It's crazy.
Well, you get the information, the same information.
Yeah.
It's just like sometimes you can switch the filter, because sometimes I'll do a reading that has like 3 layers, and if I look at it in a relationship way or life path way, I can, it's so nonlinear for me anyway. So I think whatever you're comfortable with, you just have to trust the cards.
Hey, actually, let's take a break here and go into this. For a listener that's just tuning in and they're just sitting there the entire time going, what are they talking about? What is a tarot deck? What is that? Are you talking about those tarot cards that I saw?
Yeah.
Tarot
absolutely.
cards? So, it's pronounced
tarot.
Right. The second T is silent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now there are occultists and there are writers who say that it's been around since ancient Egyptian times. I would argue that there's not a lot of evidence of them. I don't know. I'm open to. What I do know is that there was a version of tarot cards with a slightly different name. I don't remember what it is. Was used in like maybe the 15th century or something. I know that, and obviously in the 18th century they were huge. And then that means there's a lot of different decks of these cards. Tarot cards are cards that are used during divination.
Right. Yeah, so regardless of whatever school, whether you're going Thoth, which is Aleister Crowley based, or Rider-Waite based, and I'm not sure, there may be some other schools I'm not even thinking of right now, but I think those are the 2 main ones that in the West that we're using. You're going to have, it's 3 sections. There's 78 cards, and you have the minor arcana, the major arcana, and the court cards. And they all hold different energies. The minor arcana is actually based on playing cards, as I understand. And actually, tarot is a game they still play in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. And it's a card game. Then there's the major arcana. Now, the major arcana, there's 21 cards, and it's a journey. Whenever I look at those 21 cards, you start with the Fool, who's, running out into the unknown, and you end up with the World, which brings it all back around, and then you start over again in 21 cards. And that's the question. Where did that come from? A lot of people say that they know, but I don't think we really know. And I've actually heard that the major arcana basically holds all the knowledge of the Library of Alexandria, which I find fascinating. So, to my knowledge and in my studies, we don't really have a definitive answer as to where the major arcana came from. And then the court cards sort of are still the playing cards, right? But in tarot reading, the court cards can be the most challenging thing to work with for people, because they're like, is it a person? Is it an energy? What does this mean? And so that takes, I think, years of getting in tune with that to know how it's going to be interpreted in a reading.
Do you always use all of the cards, or are there instances where you might use you might narrow where you wouldn't use some cards?
I'll tell you, the only time that I take 2 cards out is when I'm doing a party or someone's really Christian and they're really afraid of the death card and the devil card. I just take those out because it'll ruin their entire reading. They obsess on it, and you're still going to get the same information. Those are the only 2 cards I ever even think about taking out. Sometimes in a health reading, I'm not a medical intuitive. I do get information usually for someone, and it's always wackadoo. Like, oh, yeah, you need to party more, for your health. I don't know. It's always like, you never know what it's going to say. But for someone who's really scared, I'll take out the death card because their subconscious can't get over it, and that's rare. So I never myself, I never take any cards out except for those instances where I feel like someone's fear is really of those two cards is going to block them from hearing what I'm saying. Yeah.
And with the Thoth deck, I never take into account upside down cards. I don't read it that way. Do you do that with you?
No, I'm a person who doesn't do upside down cards, and that's because every card has inherently challenging aspects and positive aspects. And it's interesting because everyone comes to the table with different ideas around tarot reading. Some people are more adept than others, and they're like, just lay it on me. You better tell me the truth. And sometimes when I'm flipping all the cards upright, they're like, hey, you don't have to go easy on me. I want to hear it. And I'm like, no, it actually, for me, doesn't matter if it's the cards are all upright. In fact, I can have a clearer reading because I'll get into things where my brain will start going, well, if this really negative card is upside down, does that mean that the curse was broken or it's doubled? And I'm always like, I can't go there. Like, I don't need to. Now, I may change my mind one day. You know what I mean? As I continue on this journey, maybe one day I'm going to be like, oh, now I get the reason for the right side up and upside down.
Well, it's just to say that right now, this is how it's speaking to you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I get people that ask me questions, things like, well, I heard that, someone else has to buy it for you, or I cannot do this with it, or I can't do that. And there's all these barriers, and this deck is better than that deck, and you should always blah, blah, and this and that. And like I always say to them, whatever you think is true, whatever,
Absolutely.
however it's working for you.
Absolutely. And every reader is an individual, and some people do like to have systems and ritual, and it actually means a lot to them. I let people shuffle my deck when I'm reading, but I do not like it when someone just grabs my deck. That to me is a no-no, and I don't like it. But I'm not a person who, I store my cards like in this little, cubby. It's not in its own special box. Maybe I should, but they're my friends, and I don't have a lot of rules, and I know a lot of those rules. In fact, the way I became a reader is because of those rules. Because me and my friend have the same birthday. And this is in Madison, and we were both 25, and we're interested, and we had heard that we're not allowed to buy our own tarot cards. So we each bought each other a deck, and I don't think she ever looked at hers again. And within a year, I was reading for everybody. I even had already had an alternate persona made, and I never stopped.
Some of the little pamphlets that even come in your box of cards tell you things like that, but it's true. We create our own rules or beliefs, and I completely think we're individual, and different decks will speak to us in different ways. So
I've worked with a lot of people where I have to do damage control because they went to a reader, and I'm not even talking about these new readers that rolled into town that are starting to tell people they owe them $3,000 or else the curse is going to attack them, that kind of thing.
That's predatory.
It's awful. But I'm even talking about well-meaning readers who don't take into account that humans, their minds go towards the dark and scary and depressive. And I'm aware of that, so I never lie. I always tell the truth. But I always feel like if I'm going to tell them something really challenging, I want to have an alternate path for them or an alternate idea. And I feel like sometimes readers scare people out, like when they get really intense, because I'll work with people that had a reading 20 years ago and were so scared that they didn't want to ever get one again. Right? And so I'm always like, sit down, don't be scared, come on, don't worry. And then I'm like, if they're really scared, I'm like, if you see the death or devil card, don't freak out. It's just old occult imagery. I'm not God. I don't do life or death, by the way. I refuse. Yeah. Not why I'm reading,
Well, and one of the reasons I stopped reading tarot cards, and this I just explained this to this friend too, is I felt so. I want to figure out what your viewpoint on this is. For me, the reason I had stopped years ago is that I found that A, they worked really, really good, and B, once I had an outcome and the most likely future, and I could see the things, I felt like the minute that I had that information, it actually changed my path, Mm-hmm. And I started seeing how that was, and so I stopped for that reason.
Well, and that's sort of what I was talking about, and where I was trying to get to, but forgot, was that people are really vulnerable when you're reading for them, and anything you say can be a seed that they manifest. So they may think that you're really accurate because you predicted the future, and there is a type of prediction that goes on, but I want to address that too. It's not how we view it, though. A reader has a lot of power to manifest something for someone, and that's why you have to. That's like sacred territory, and a person is being vulnerable, and you don't want to plant the wrong thing, right? So you have to be really sensitive about that. And I really feel like when I'm working with the cards, I'm working where fate and free will are meeting all the time. And I really think of myself more as a mirror, right? And that's where the more I read, the more I'm sort of a student now of like Alejandro Jodorowsky, who wrote Psycho Magic, The Way of the Tarot. He was the director of Holy Mountain. Really he said a couple of things that have been really profound to me. And he's like, I don't predict the future. Although I saw him giving a reading in some documentary, and he sort of was doing that because you can't help it. So when you're reading for someone, and if you're reading like I read, which is their energy, and you lay out the cards and you get all this information, you can sort of see if they keep doing what they're doing, this is where it's going to go. And if you don't like what I'm telling you, then change it. Like, this isn't about predestiny. It's about clarity. Like, here, this is where you're at. This is where you're going. Do you like that? If you do, keep going. Maybe here's some ways you can make it better. If you don't like it, let's talk about what's going on here. I mean, I deal with everything. I hear everything. And, sometimes I feel like people just want to get their hair blown back. And I get it, because that's how readers are portrayed and fortune tellers, like in the media and movies and stuff. And sometimes there is some of that. Like, sometimes I even get freaked out. But mostly it's more like, hey, let's sit down. Let's take a minute. And I am getting information, but people get confused because I don't feel like I'm getting information from people that have passed on. I'm not being talked to by spirits, usually. And that's on purpose, but there is another level of information that I call like the quantum soup, where it's sort of like the tarot is tapping into this quantum level of information. Like, there's so much more information besides our five senses. It's like in our society, if you can't read it with your five senses or logic, it doesn't exist. And it's like, that's bullshit, So the tarot is in there, and I can't really explain it to people, but the way I see it is this cosmic spider web, and where the webs meet is a person. And we can all sort of do this like cosmic communication, but we've been trained to shut that down. So I help people, because I open up to it, I help them open up to it. But the spreads that I use, and a spread is how you lay out your cards and what each card means, and then whatever card falls into that place, you sort of can get an idea. Is I've made up my own, because I'm really convinced that how we see ourselves in the world is what we end up manifesting unconsciously. So I have a couple cards, not just one, that are our internal landscape, where you're at, where you're going. And my most alarming spreads actually are not what's around, like, oh, here's your future and here's your outcome for now, because I only do like 6 months to a year readings. I can't really grasp much farther than that. But the readings that I think are surprising to people, that for me are the most troubling, is when someone has a beautiful spread, really positive, really forward moving, and then I look at their internal cards and they're dark. And I'm like, oh shit. Like, if you keep on with this attitude, and by the way, I am usually reading the person like that too. Okay. Like, it's like that whenever that happens, I already know that that's what's happening. Right. And I can't tell you how. And I'll be like, okay, you've got to change your perspective, or else everything, all this beautiful stuff that you're not even appreciating right now, is going to be manifested a couple years from now in another way. It's really important. Like, we are not just pawns in the universe, but I feel like the cards really can get in to where we're actually at, right? And be like a mirror, and to see yourself, And most of the time people are like, God, I already knew that. Thanks for affirming that. You know, I do a lot of relationship readings where it's like, oh yeah, picking up on certain energies. We go into it, helps people get clear on that situation. So really I'm just sort of a guide, you know. And then, but sometimes I have people sit down, they're like, I'm just curious, I just want to see, you know, and those are always interesting trips because I'm like, all right, let's go. I have no idea what's going to happen.
So you meet someone, you meet someone, they come in to you, and a friend told them that such and such deck was bad, that you shouldn't use that. What do you think of that?
Well, number one, my curiosity is, what deck is it? And number two, I'm probably just going to say, well, that's bullshit, unless this is the only way I'd say that might be true, is if someone who was doing dark art or who was just had really terrible energy, manifested terrible things in their lives, gave you that deck, I probably wouldn't use that deck.
Right. So a specific deck because someone had placed that negative energy in there. But
yeah,
in a broad sense of a deck just because they didn't like the name of it or something, you're right, that wouldn't be relative.
No.
Yeah, relevant.
No. I think there's decks that are more appropriate for some people than others. Like,
how does someone choose a deck?
Okay, well, I think that if you're a beginner, you should just go basic. You should choose to either start with the Thoth system or the Rider-Waite system and get to be intimate with that, right? Generally, if people don't even know what I'm talking about, I'll say go Rider-Waite because there's a lot of books and most decks are based off of that system. And if you want to learn more, then you can go to Thoth. So, and I definitely, if you really want to be a serious student, I would definitely pick a deck that has more traditional occult imagery in it so you can really get the gist. There's so much information in those old decks. And if you study those images, you're going to get, it's deep, deep, deep stuff. And so, for instance, for a few years, I was using this new deck that came out called The Wild Unknown. It was absolutely gorgeous, but it just stopped speaking to me one day, so I don't use it anymore. It might speak to me again, and I'll start using it again, but this happens to me now. I'll use a deck for years intensively. I'm not a person who's like, pick your deck, because it's me talking to the deck. Anyways, The Wild Unknown, gorgeous, but it doesn't hardly have any traditional imagery, so I do not recommend that.
Is it newer?
Yeah, it came out last few years. I don't recommend that to someone who really wants to become a serious student. It's sort of like you need to learn how to draw and paint, I feel like, something more classical before you can really be a great abstract artist. You know what I mean? So I definitely say go more traditional and get real serious and do a lot of readings.
What kind of answers when they come to you for a tarot reading?
I can give most answers. Here's what I don't give answers to. Life and death. Am I going to have a baby? Well, I have one caveat for that, but I'm not going to go into it. Generally, I'm like, let's talk about why you're here asking about that, right? I definitely don't do death. That's in the universe's hands. I don't do trials because you're in the system for a reason, and let the system take care of it. And I don't do yes or no. But what I do is if you have a yes or no question, I'm like, we can look at this and I can probably gather enough information for you so that you'll have an idea of where this is going and some of the decisions you're going to have to make, right? I get the yes or no a lot. Like, I'm with this person right now and I just don't know where it's going. Are we going to be together? And it's like, okay, I don't do yes or no, but let's look and see where it's probably going. And I feel like I'm, fairly accurate. I'm not some deity. I can't do 100%, but I feel like I'm mostly pretty good, but that's reading the whole situation. And the cards always get behind it. Like my take on it, the energy I'm feeling mixed with the cards, I ask a few choice questions here or there.
If someone has a reading with you and then they come back later and they say, hey, none of that came out, none of that worked out, what conversation do you have with them then?
Hardly ever happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Ever. I've had people tell me many times I saved their life, right? right? Because I just gave them space to like hear, and there is helpers, and there are spirit guides, but I don't think what I'm working with are necessarily dead people. I'm not really sure. I don't have all the answers. I just know what my intuition is telling me.
Truth and honesty is very important to you, and in life in general, living in truth, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because, you know, sort of one of the things that's becoming more and more important to me, especially in this political environment we're in, and, you know, being under the thumb of the corporations, you know, it's like we're constantly being lied to. The politicians are lying, and people are just seeming to lie really easy. And, you know, when I'm working with people, I really more and more, I'm like, all right, let's talk about direct communication. Let's talk about honesty. And because a lot of times people are even lying to themselves and don't know it. So I always say, hey, I'm really nice, but I don't lie. So like, I will tell you a truth that's probably going to be hard as I see it, but I'm a really nice person. Like, it's always for the betterment.
Yeah, isn't that a weird? So okay, so lying, I get it, I understand. First of all, we lie to ourselves from the minute we wake up in the morning. We bullshit ourselves, I'll say, in the sense that we don't think about the mortality, how we could just any second, you know.
Right.
And it's something called confirmation bias. I think that we should start teaching this to children at a very young age, so that we can become more empathetic towards others. When we start realizing how full of crap we are, you know, with our internal thoughts and our cycles, then I think we can be more forgiving of others and realizing.
Absolutely.
And look outside of us. So I get lying in that sense. There's some lying that we do to ourselves that we can't. We all believe things that just aren't true. We don't. You know, we do. All of us, right? And then hopefully we strive to be better than that. Hopefully we strive to find our truths and the truths that are out there. Then there's another kind of liar. There's the kind where they're being malicious. They're trying to manipulate people. They're trying to hurt others. And I want to say that's their ignorance is causing them to do that, but it doesn't fully excuse it either, right?
Right.
You know?
And, you know, that brings up to me the card, the Knight of Cups. Okay. And the thing about the Knight of Cups, specifically in a relationship reading, when he shows up, is he always has an agenda. So I'm always really, really clear with the person I'm reading for. This agenda could be good. Maybe this person is madly in love with you and wants to come in and sweep you off your feet and take you away to make them theirs the rest of your life. And if you want that, his agenda is awesome, or her agenda. It's a knight, can be either. But according to what I'm picking up on in the other cards around, that agenda could be they are saying one thing and their motivation is totally different than what they're presenting to you. And that I have found to be very accurate. So even if it's good, I always feel leery around the Knight of Cups, right? Some people just always have an alternate agenda, and their agenda usually has to do with their safety, their power, their needs. And because I guess I should use the word hidden agenda. So the Knight of Cups, he always has a hidden agenda. You know, it's the water knight, probably Scorpio, Cancer, Pisces thing. You know, water sometimes doesn't like to expose everything. But yeah, absolutely. And, you know, so when I'm reading and a card like that comes up, I'll look to see what other cards are around. If I see the Moon and the Seven of Swords, I'm like, watch it. Right? Watch it. And usually, almost always, that is a confirmation of what I already am feeling. Sometimes I get shocked. Like, sometimes I'm picking one thing up and the cards say another, and then I have to really revisit it and really keep working on it to see, because I trust myself and I trust the cards. So that card paired up with other cards is, to me, the gaslighting card, because gaslighting is when someone has an agenda that they're not sharing with you, and they're somehow trying to make you believe that you're wrong, right? They always do that for their own agenda. So, you know, the Knight of Cups is very, very complex. It's more complex to me than the other knights. And, you know, and I'll bring bring this up. I'll be like, do you have a gaslighter around? Does this person gaslight? And they'll be like, what's gaslighting? Well, I'm like, well, I'll tell you about it. But I don't know. I do believe that we all have confirmation bias, but I will say this: there are human truths, right? If you care about humans and you care about being a human and a good human, even most religions can be distilled down to some really core truths about, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. I think the Buddhists and the witches say what you do comes back 3 times, right? It's sort of, there's some real truths out there. And so you might have confirmation bias, but then there's people that really just care about power, right? Greed. I don't even know where that comes from. I assume they're totally fucked up, right? That's like, I don't think anybody who's raised with love and kindness is going to come out like a human monster,
I learned a long time ago that and you learn this from relationships, with intimate relationships, that someone looking to control others, that seems to be a reflection of them not having control over their own life. Trying. Now they want to control you. They want to control, has something to do with their own. So I try to have some sympathy for that, but I've got to keep boundaries.
Well, right. With people that are what you would call toxic, you can understand them. And, in my life, many times I just have to do what my friend calls a French exit to a certain degree, when it's not really issues that are going on. It's more like their fundamental worldview is really damaging to them and the people around them. There's not a lot you can do because I'm not out to like be somebody's healer necessarily. I'd be drained, right? So it's sort of like, okay, without a lot, with love, I'm sending you off and I need to protect myself, right? It's totally okay to do that because we're all beautiful creatures and we're not supposed to be hurting ourselves by exposure to that if we can help it, because it's all our own responsibility to heal ourselves, including that person who maybe has those personality traits that are damaging to you and themselves.
Yeah, and you, we talked before we started recording, and you have other, like, I'm trying to figure out how to put it into words. You're not a medium.
I choose not to be.
And then there's the but, right? Yes. Can you talk about the but? Can you talk about?
Yeah. Let me talk about the but.
Can you talk about the but?
So
take us back to the very, very beginning.
Okay.
Kind of.
So my whole life, growing up, I had experiences that were basically, I believe, the spirit world being in my daily life, right? Different places I've lived in. One, when I was in college, what went down is a whole story I'm not going to get into, but it was so extreme and terrifying that we ended up calling the police, and even the police were freaked out. Then, most of the rest is just benign, but my mom has also had these experiences. We were up at this old house in Grand Traverse Bay, and it's another story. My parents decided to leave the house early, but didn't tell us why, and it was just crazy shit was happening. So I guess my point is that my entire child and into my adult life, I was having these experiences that felt like out of my control. I didn't really like it. I didn't feel like I was ever being asked permission. So I have just decided that I'm going to stay here and now, work with energy, work with, reading people, using the cards, but probably because of my past, because I felt like so many times my life was affected in ways where I didn't invite somebody in and they just were coming in anyway. Because what'll happen to me is I'll be in a house and a ton of things are happening, and then nothing's happening to anybody else. And so I sound like I'm the crazy one. But if you've ever read Deanne Fortune, Deanne Fortune? She was Aleister Crowley's contemporary, and she wrote a book called Psychic Self-Protection. She literally says that 2 people can be in a space and one person is being affected and all these things are happening, and the other person, nothing ever happens and they don't see or hear anything. That has been my experience. So I decided, 2 decades ago now, that whenever I move into a space, to just say, hey, if anyone's here, please, I am not interested. I'm not inviting you in. Please don't come in if you're not invited. And ever since then, I actually have been in houses, group houses, where other people are experiencing things and I'm not. And that's fine with me. So, you know, I may change. I'm a Gemini. I might change my mind and decide to move into more working with the people who have passed, but I'm not really interested in that. I came from there, I'm going there. I'm more interested in just the here and now. And I think that that's more work where you've got to be really careful because you don't know what you're dealing with, really. Yeah, absolutely. I'm in general, all around, extremely sensitive. Like, I had a desk job once and I got so ill. Like, you know what I mean? Like, sort of the trajectory of my life has taken all the different things I've done. It's choice, but in a way it's not choice. Because if I lie to myself and try and do something that isn't what I believe in or what feels good and right to me, I get sick, right? You know what a psychic vampire is. I am so sensitive to that, right? And that I need to, I can feel drained really easily. As I take each journey around our sun, if you know what I mean, I learn every year more and more about where my boundaries are, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. You know, I gave up trying to save people years ago, but I try and help people find their own path. And I definitely do a lot more. I have visualizations I do every day when I'm doing my work to not take it on, because I used to not know how to do that. You know, like I'd be like totally enmeshed in that person's story and trying to help them, and you know, and then it's like that's not good for anybody. And
I still struggle with that. Yeah.
But you know, that's the plight of the healer, empath, artist, right? It's just like that sensitivity that some people, I think we're all that inside, but I think it's just different degrees. And some of us, I just happen to be on that level of like, I've always felt like the spirits are like, hey, there's one, you know? And I'm like, wait, no, I can't. I gotta like be here. So that's why I'm a psychic and not a medium. It's just sort of overwhelming. Just this life on this plane is overwhelming for me.
Here's a question for both of you. How does a person that is trying to achieve their highest self, is trying to be a good person and thinks of themselves as a spiritual person, how does someone, and doesn't want to bring harm to others, how does that person then stand up for themselves? And because if you stand up for yourself, someone might get hurt, like someone who may be hurting you or something. How do you know what I'm saying? Like, being a spiritual, good, harmony person, does that mean that you basically just have to eat shit all the time, you know, from others?
No.
You know, like...
No, in fact, being a good person, sometimes you end up having to be a warrior, you know, which is scary because you have to say the truth when other people don't want to say it. But that's for you to determine, right? If you're really coming out of a place of light and goodness and not being controlling, I think it's important to speak truth. But then you have to differentiate that from what your ego's doing. Right? It's like truth versus ego. And man, I don't know. I haven't sat on the side of a mountain for 7 years meditating. You know, it's like you can only do the best you can. What do you think?
So one thing that I love that you said even before we started recording, we've asked a lot of really amazing people so far what it is that they do. Before you even spoke about being somebody who reads into energy and also reads tarot cards. The first thing that you said, which was completely unique again, was that above all things you're a humanitarian. And my heart just like burst when you said that. So I'm sitting with that idea right now. This is a premise for your question, Atten. And we have to do so much with our own internal awareness. And, Atten, you were talking about symptoms of a fragmented society. and that's the reason why we might have motives and try and manipulate. And while it might be a fair assessment to say that I have to know the people who are around me, and if I'm putting out a certain energy and they're giving back a certain energy, is my tank full, is my tank empty? It's wise to understand that, but I don't think that somebody who really lives for the benefit of all beings to be their best themselves, that the forethought is what am I gonna get out of like this good deed? And so it's not always easy being a reader. It's not easy being somebody who is sensitive to the information in other people's fields. And above all, you do have to be a clear channel, which means speaking the truth, but to step into the place of even saying, how can I also package this so that it's true, people will put a reader in a certain light. Either it's spooky and you should know without me saying anything, or I want you to tell me so I don't have to say it or make it the decision. It's a fine line to know
Absolutely.
that. It's a fine line to know that if somebody sees this particular card, and I've had that experience too, somebody saw the devil and just about jumped 10 feet back, that can leave a scarring impression for some people. So to be very sensitive and discerning, and how do I bring forward the information, not in a way because I'm foretelling a future, but in a way that I can see many layers of possibilities, and I'm going to empower the person coming to me, regardless of their agenda, with the most clear information that I can provide so that they can make a choice to empower themselves. And in that exchange, you're left full. Sometimes it's still hurtful if some other things happen, but you're in a full and a clear place, and hopefully that person has also gained and become informed of the decisions in their own consciousness that they can make. Because the truth is, whatever you say, everyone is going to hit that place inside of themselves that says, oh, this is a validation, whether I'm giving that away to the person reading for me or not. Like, I know that this is showing up in my shadow aspect that I need to shift if I want to have a better outcome, or this is on track and now I can make the choice, that I thought I might have to.
You know what? John Oliver, last week tonight.
Yeah.
I love him. He's brilliant. He's a great comedian. He's
I don't know.
Yeah,
I love him too, but he did that thing on psychics.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing. So, and Penn and Teller recently did one too that I just recently saw. I think it was an older one. So I actually think that everyone should watch that. I tell all my guests, everyone, you should watch the John Oliver thing, because I think you should know what to look for to debunk frauds. But the one danger that people can come away from watching that is an idea that all of them are frauds.
Right.
Some of these people that are being fraudulent may have even started because they had a real gift. I don't know. But when you get to a point where you have to produce results like this constantly, like that, it's some point. I don't think it works that way. Like for the way talking to a dead person, some of those things that he showed, and that Penn Teller just showed, yeah, those are tricks. Those are people not being honest. Those are people being manipulative, right? But it doesn't mean that everyone.
Yeah. Oh my God, I have so much to say. First and foremost, we live in a materialistic, reductionist society where, like I said, the only things that are considered legitimate are what you're experiencing through your five senses and what logic says. And there's an entire reality that's massive that doesn't go through any of those channels or only partially and is still completely real. And it works differently. Like, than we know how to do with A plus B equals C. Now, in terms of finding a good reader, I always say either go word of mouth, like you personally know somebody who went to somebody and they were great, number one. Number two, if you're going to look for someone, I suggest you go to someone who is like where I'm at, like has a table at a store, because the reputation of the store is linked to the reputation of the reader. And if the reader is doing things that are not kosher, the store's going to be like, you're out of here,
our field is one that is ripe with predators because of the nature of the work. People looking for help and healing.
Yeah.
And being intuitive doesn't necessarily mean being highly conscious. You can totally be still using it for your own good and gain.
Having a conscience.
That's why you're right. You have to be really careful who you see and make sure that they're clear and coming from a good source.
And I know that none of us sitting here is perfect. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking, if you're doing the best you can and you're coming out of a good place, if you end up hurting somebody, that sucks, But it's different than literally not caring if you're hurting somebody for your own gain.
Where the goal seems to be to hurt someone. Like, arguably that's their goal. Because they're just trying to get money out of them. They're trying to hurt someone.
The more I scare you, the more money I can get out of you.
Yeah.
What I hope happens, I haven't heard about this, but since you have mentioned it, I did have somebody come see me a couple of years ago, and I didn't get all the details, but they had also had a reading with somebody that just scared the daylights out of them, and they were seeking a different answer. So so maybe this is becoming more and more prevalent, but what I hope it might do, if anything, is have people end up with somebody legitimate and receive the loving other response.
And you read tarot cards too, right? What deck do you still read them? Do you have them?
My first deck was the Rider. Well, actually, when I was really, really little, before I even knew there were tarot cards, I used to just do like fortune telling with the playing deck. But then I found out, there's something called tarot cards, and I got the Rider-Waite deck. And I also know, like in a hermetic sense, not all the symbols are just perfect. But when I'm reading for other people, I pretty much stick with that. To Christina's point, it's pretty basic. People can, without really even knowing the cards, get their own inner sense of what they're looking at a lot of times. Yeah.
And do you find that, for both of you, do you find that when you're trying to live your best life and you're trying to live an honest life and you're trying to be a truthful life, that from my experience is that it makes it harder in this life, because then I see how much dishonesty there is around me. And then I remember, well, maybe that's why I became so dishonest in my 20s, because everyone's doing it around me. Of course I became that person, because look at around me, everyone, how could you not be that way?
Not for me, because like I said, I don't really have a choice. Like, I'm a horrible liar. Like, I'm terrible. I can't hardly do it. And a lot of the people I know that were born in the year, I was born in 1970, which is the year of the Iron Dog. A lot of my friends who were born in my year actually are the same way. Like, every time you lie, you get caught, right? But it's also an inclination for honesty, because it's dogs, right? But it's Iron Dog, Metal Dog. Wah! But I feel like if that's true for you, it's going to change eventually, right? Because by being honest and being direct and being real in your life and coming out of a good place, you're going to just keep drawing that to yourself more and more and more and more. You might still be working out bad karma from when you were lying. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I go back to that a lot.
So I think that as the more you go, that we all try and be coming from a light place and an honest place and a loving place.
Right, you get into the good cycle.
Even when
and
we're
you're surrounding
totally
yourself.
not perfect,
Yeah.
that's what we draw to ourselves. It's like, to bring it back to my readings, I have the opposite reading. I told you the scariest one is when someone's cards are excellent except for their inner cards, which are black, right?
Yeah.
Lots of times I do readings for people, it's the total opposite. They can have a shit show of a reading, but if they have, the sun, like in their internal realm, you've got like the sun and like the world, or just cards that are really positive, I know that they're probably just working some karma out and they're going to manifest that inner light. And it always happens. We always do it consciously and unconsciously.
I think that I'll think like, all right, I've had enough bad stuff happen. I've totally worked out all that bad negative karma for I'm good now. Everything's cool. All right, this is great. And then something bad happens again. Are you serious?
Well,
I thought I worked that out.
But you may not know. You don't know. We don't really know when our karma.
Oh, I'm finding that out all the time, right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I really do believe that how you see yourself in your life and what energy you're putting out there is what you end up eventually manifesting and attracting.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you're on your way.
And we started out the conversation about beliefs, about how you should do or not do readings, or buy decks or not buy decks. Even if you buy into the idea of karma, it's like a boomerang, right? It's always going to come back at some point, like, oh, I cleared it now, but oh, the next bad thing. So you be careful of that too.
Yeah, I'm trying not to beat myself too much about the things that in the past. I was ignorant. I acted with ignorance. It's also the only thing I knew, and now I look around. There's so much dishonesty around me.
And another thing I think that I'm really noticing is, for some of us who come out of neglect, abuse, chaos, various levels of that, because that can be totally intense or it can be just subtle but there, right? It's really hard when we get to a point in our life where things are starting to go well and it feels weird, like it feels too quiet.
Yeah, you get worried.
And you don't really know how to be light, right? Yeah. You don't really know how to deal with that out there. And
give yourself permission to be happy.
Yeah, and because we have such deep energetic grooves towards drama, chaos, bad things happening, sometimes it takes a while to keep moving forward, and you'll drag that in just to relearn to let it go, you know. And I'm convinced when people are doing their work to heal that they get lighter and happier. It's the people that don't do their work that keep manifesting that shit over and over again, where things are going well and they gotta sabotage it. Things are going well and they got to draw in that situation because they haven't learned that heaviness, even sometimes that heaviness feels like a grounding compared to a lightness that feels like scary because it's unfamiliar and untethered, right? Yeah. You know who I deal with that with a lot with my clients in a very weird way, I'm just going off on a tangent here, is one of the groups of people I work with that's a little more challenging, are specifically this. A woman who's in her second Saturn returns around 58, 60, who her whole life has been a wife, mother, nurse. Like literally a nurse and a mother and a wife. The kids are moved out. She can retire and her marriage is 30 years old. And she's terrified, right? Because her main thing was to be a caregiver her whole life. Her whole entire identity was these three roles that are now completely not nearly as demanding and are changing and actually can even be released. And it's just like, it's too much. It's too light. There's too much choice. You know, like it's like the scariness, like you're just floating, you know?
So, Xtina, I want to really thank you for coming in and sitting down with us and talking to us on Don't Be Afraid and sharing with us your light and your energy and helping our audience understand more about tarot cards. And I'm hoping that our listeners will seek you out. And if they choose to seek you out, how, again, would they find you?
I will tell you that in a moment, but I want to tell you thank you for inviting me to be part of this show. It's been great, and I'm really happy to meet both of you.
Likewise.
Like, this has been really enjoyable. This conversation is good. This is the kind of conversation I could have for like another 5 hours. Like,
I know,
you know,
right?
Over like
yeah,
about
absolutely.
a line, right? So anyways, thank you for...
It's our pleasure, absolutely.
Yeah, inviting me. And the way to reach me is to go to my website, which is scarletfoundry.com, or just Google Xtina Seattle, and it's all there. I'm also at Tenzing Momo in Pike Place Market, and I'm there several days a week. So if you want to see me in person, right now that's the only place I'm reading.
Quickly, how do you spell Xtina?
Xtina.
And then Tenzing Momo, how do you spell that?
Tenzing, Momo, Momo. And Scarlet Foundry is Scarlet Foundry.
Is it one word, two separate words?
Well, it's two
big
separate
word.
words, but if you do Scarlet Foundry, it's the only one that I think exists. Which, by the way, that Scarlet Foundry is our hearts. It's like that bloody foundry of emotion and, beating an anvil.
The courageous pounder, the courageous pounder of truth in our hearts. Keep us on the...
Yeah, so that's how to find me. And I also do phone readings. I have clients all over the world. I do Skype
And on the theme, we kind of have started ending our shows this way. On the theme of don't be afraid, do you have any advice on that topic?
Oh, yeah. Number one, don't be afraid of getting a tarot reading, okay? Like, so many people come in the store like, oh, I'm really afraid, or my friend's not going to do it. I'm afraid. Because if you're with a good reader, it can only enlighten your life. But honestly, fear does more harm than anything. Fear of speaking our truth, fear of going for what we want. I guess fear, it boils down to me like, in a weird way, what are you in control of? What aren't you in control of? And don't let what you're not in control of scare you into not doing what you are in control of, right? And also, don't be afraid of what you can do,
Are there times when you've let fear control you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because... well, number one, I'm a woman, right? And a certain amount of fear is necessary for safety.
The quote that I just saw the other day, that men are worried that women will laugh at them. Women are worried that men will kill them. That's so
And, it's...
horrible
and the
and
thing
true.
is, it's true. And I think our society is having this painful awakening to what equality is. And there's a lot of backlash against that, But there's times where you do need to be afraid. And then there's times where, I just know people in my own life, who are just living in fear. Like, fear dominates. And then that gets played upon by media and things like that. But on a more profound level...
Well, fear can be a good emotion, because fear can stop you from putting a firecracker in your mouth and lighting it on fire. Because that will kill you.
Totally.
But then when it's fear that's not based in anything.
Yeah, but we're all human, right? And we all came out of these weird tribal systems, and now everything's different. Like, we've evolved way too fast for our poor human brain, so I understand why we're afraid and have anxiety. Like, I get it. So if we can just lighten up. For me, I'm always like, oh, just lighten up. Just lighten up. It's all going to be okay. Just lighten up. And especially if I can try and have compassion, that lightens me up.
I keep trying to remember the universe is smarter than me. The universe, okay, Atten, that thing that's happening is terrible, and that's not what you would have chosen, but the universe obviously is got something better waiting for you. And I try to tell myself that to get through depression and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, Xtina,
Oh, yeah.
I want to thank you so much for joining us.
So happy to be here.
It's been great talking with you. And from Atten and
Angela.
And
Xtina.
we thank you for all listening. This has been Don't Be Afraid, your paranormal podcast.